Year 10 and 11, welcome to your quick revision on the plot of Jekyll and Hyde with some key quotations. So chapter 1 is Story of the Door, and in this chapter Utterson and Enfield are taking a Sunday walk, and there's a lot of silence in there which I suppose creates suspense. And then as they walk down this street, which we're told is quite prosperous, one building has this door, and the door contrasts with the other buildings on the street because the other buildings are clean and quite smart. And when we get this description of this door, it's quite negative. Words such as sinister and sordid. And then we are then told later in the chapter that Mr. Hyde has a key to the building, so we know it's going to be important. The essence of the chapter, though, is Enfield introduces us to Mr. Hyde. He tells this story where he saw Hyde trample a young girl. So your key quotation there is trampled calmly over her. We are told that he looks like Satan, that he's a damn juggernaut, he wasn't like a man, something is wrong with his appearance. We get quite a lot of time spent on Hyde here. Obviously trampling over the girl is quite a violent act. And Enfield, when he tries to describe Hyde, can't explain or can't put his finger on why he's so disgusting. And we get the word deformed. Hyde goes into the door and returns with a cheque signed by Dr. Jekyll. So he kind of pays off the family of the girl. So immediately there's a lot of mystery surrounding him. Okay. Chapter 2 is Search for Mr. Hyde, and in this we get Henry Jekyll's will. So Utterson has Jekyll's will, which says that if he dies or disappears, that all of his things should go to Edward Hyde. So immediately Utterson thinks that Hyde is blackmailing Jekyll. When Utterson visits Dr. Lanyon, he finds out that Lanyon and Jekyll have fallen out over something scientific. And Lanyon describes Jekyll as interested in fanciful things, whereas Lanyon believes in traditional science. We also find out that there's like a hint that Jekyll's scientific work has a darker side to it. So Utterson actually leaves Lanyon's, but he doesn't actually know who Hyde is still. Utterson then meets Hyde in this chapter and has the same feeling as Enfield, that he's unsettled. So when he meets Hyde, we get a description again. There's a lot of quotations on this slide, that he was pale and dwarfish. He snarled aloud. He has a savage laugh, a hissing intake of breath. He was hardly human. We again get something very similar to Enfield, where Utterson can't quite explain what it is about Hyde that is so awful. So again, we have within this chapter the idea that Jekyll's house is important. So the building that Hyde went into is a laboratory that is attached to Jekyll's house. So that is kind of a hint, isn't it? And don't forget, in this chapter, Poole, who is like the butler to Jekyll, tells Utterson that the servants all have orders to obey Hyde. So again, he becomes more convinced that Jekyll is being blackmailed and manipulated by Hyde. Chapter 3, Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. We find out that Jekyll is a popular, respectable man, and he invites Utterson to this social circle, if you like, of respectable, intelligent, upper-class men. And this is the first time we truly meet Jekyll, I suppose. His dinner party shows that he, as I say, is respectable and sociable. He's described as kind, but he's also described as slyish. So there on the slide there it says a slyish cast. So again, we have a hint at the darker side of Jekyll. Now, Utterson tries to talk to Jekyll about his will. So he questions him. But Jekyll tries to hide the fact that he doesn't want to discuss it, and he changes the subject quite quickly. And therefore the reader becomes curious as to why Jekyll isn't revealing the will and answering the questions of Utterson. Jekyll sees Lanyon as someone ignorant, who didn't give his scientific work a chance. And don't forget, in the context of the book, so the 1800s, it was a time of scientific progress, wasn't it? And that's kind of underlying here. Obviously, in this chapter, Jekyll has something to hide by avoiding the explanation of the will. So we have the theme of secrecy again. The theme of secrecy builds up throughout the novel. He tells Utterson that he has a great interest in Hyde, but he won't explain why. And again, he says something very, very odd. That is, the moment I choose, I can be rid of Mr. Hyde. But we don't find out later, and obviously it isn't true. We can't just be rid of him, can he? Because as we find out later on in the novel, the side of Hyde is taking over, isn't it? Okay, so not a great deal happens in that chapter. I suppose it's just the description of Dr. Jekyll's character, which is a massive contrast to what we've seen of Hyde, isn't it? Chapter 4 is the Carew murder case. Straightforward, really. Hyde murders Danvers Carew. So we go. This chapter begins a year later, and we have the maid's account of Carew's murder, and it's a police statement. So actually, what happens here is we have to take the maid's perspective. And she describes the murder, and it's quite shocking, isn't it? We get, again, this idea that he tramples his victim. We have the description of him ape-like fury. He's like a madman, he clubs him to death. So there's a huge description of the act. So when he tramples Carew, we have the evil side of Hyde, because he attacks him for no reason. And the ape-like fury description is animalistic, and it's this idea of primal nature and primitive man. In the 1800s, the theory of evolution was released by Charles Darwin, so we might want to look at that in our revision of context as well. We hear the gruesome detail of him clubbing Carew, trampling on him, jumping, a storm of blows. The fact that he leaves Carew mangled. We hear the bones breaking as well, when it says that he was audibly shattered. Utterson and the police then search for Hyde. And I suppose in this chapter we have this idea of duplicity and the duality of mankind, because in the chapter previous we had Jekyll as intelligent, reputable, respectable, and now we have obviously the other side of him, which is this animalistic man who's quite evil. Utterson takes the police to Hyde's house, and we get a description of it again. It's dingy, it's dismal, it's some sort of nightmare, it's dark. We get a description of the fog. It makes us feel uneasy. I suppose the setting of Hyde's door and house and location is a representation of the evil side of him. So that's quite an important chapter if you ever answer a question about Hyde. We move on to Incident of the Letter, and Jekyll begins to act very strange after the Carew murder. His behaviour becomes odd. He is in his laboratory when Utterson goes to see him, and Utterson has never visited him there before. Again, we've got this mention of the dingy building that we already associate with Hyde from the last chapter. We are told that he looks deadly sick, that he has a cold hand, he's feverish. We realise he's agitated. He has a change in his voice. Stevenson, don't forget, includes letters as part of his narrative. So Jekyll claims that he has received a letter from Hyde. He gives it to Utterson because he's worried. Utterson is then relieved. But they're concerned that Jekyll's name is going to get dragged into the scandal of the Carew murder. Now, initially, Utterson is convinced that the letter is real and authentic and has come from Hyde, but Poole then says that nothing was ever delivered to the house. So we realise that the letter can't be trusted. When he takes the letter home and shows it to his guest, we find out that Hyde's handwriting is similar to Jekyll's. So we have this a link that they are the same person, don't we? And this comes back to an idea that was, again, new at the time that the novel was written, which was graphology. And some people believed that you could tell, if you looked at someone's handwriting, you could tell what their personality was like. So you've got that link. I mean, obviously that's nonsensical to us now, but at the time that was a new founded science, if you like. We move then to the remarkable incident of Dr. Lanyon, and Jekyll seems to be back to normal. Time passes and Hyde hasn't been seen, so it's as if he hasn't existed. Jekyll goes back to holding dinner parties. But then after a period of time, I think it's 2 months, Jekyll retreats from society again without explanation. Okay, and there is also a sudden change in Dr. Lanyon. So when Utterson visits Lanyon to see if he knows more, he is shocked by what he sees, because Lanyon is now older. As it says there, the rosy man had grown pale. His flesh had fallen away. There is a deep-seated terror on his face. It says there, his death warrant written legibly upon his face. So obviously there's something wrong with Lanyon. Lanyon believes he's going to die very, very soon. He makes a claim as to, if we all knew, we should all be glad to get away. Utterson writes to Jekyll asking why Lanyon dislikes him so much, and Jekyll's reply is quite mysterious. And he hints on that Jekyll is involved in a dangerous situation. Lanyon does die, but before he does, or as he does, he leaves Utterson an envelope. And if he reads it, he's going to find out the truth. But there's another envelope as well that says it can't be opened until the death or disappearance of Jekyll. Now, when Jekyll wrote to Lanyon, he said, if I am the chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also. So again, there's this internal conflict within Jekyll that's yet to be fully revealed. As a reader, we know it's because obviously he's Hyde as well. Utterson is tempted to open the letters of Lanyon, but because he's, a professional man, he doesn't. Okay, so Utterson, remember, leaves the letters, Lanyon leaves the letters, explaining everything to Utterson, but tells him he can't open the letters until Jekyll is dead or has disappeared. Okay. Incident at the Window is a short chapter where Jekyll's secret is nearly revealed, and he talks to Utterson and Enfield from the window of his laboratory. As they talk, we get a description of Jekyll, that he looks like some disconsolate prisoner, And then that the smile was struck out of his face and succeeded by an expression of such abject terror, because he is about to transform into Hyde. Now, this look on Jekyll's face freezes the blood of Utterson and Enfield, because they don't know the truth. And again, it's this idea of suspense and secrecy. What has happened to Jekyll? What is happening to Jekyll? The last night is an important chapter. What happens then is Poole is concerned about Jekyll and his odd behaviour, so he visits Utterson to tell him. We're told that it's a wild, cold night, so we've got instances of the pathetic fallacy, and it's dark. When Utterson and Poole arrive at Jekyll's house, the maids are hysterical. Poole says he is heard crying from inside the cabinet. But the door to the cabinet remains locked, and they need obviously to break it down. Poole says he saw someone outside of the cabinet, and if it was Jekyll, he must have been wearing a mask. So we might remember the one-word quotation, mask. Okay, because it's this idea of a dual personality. Also, the word hide, as in to disguise something. So mask is important. And also a mask would hide your true identity. So the reputation of Jekyll. Now, Utterson struggles to find an actual explanation here, doesn't he? And Poole is convinced that Jekyll has been murdered by Hyde. So they decide to break down the door. When they break down this door, they find a body. And it is contorted. Jekyll isn't there. In Hyde's hand, there is the crushed potion, which shows that he has committed suicide. When he's lying on the floor, you've got clothes far too large for him, dead body. Okay. Interestingly, though, we are told that Hyde's body lies in this quite normal room, and therefore this is Stevenson reminding us that this is an ordinary person and that good and evil exists in everybody. Utterson finds a letter from Jekyll which he goes home to read with Lanyon's account, and this is when we're told that the mystery will now be explained. So remember, Hyde is lying dead on the floor here, and we've only got 2 chapters left, which is Dr. Lanyon's narrative and then the full statement by Henry Jekyll. So Dr. Lanyon's narrative is a flashback, and it takes us back to kind of the middle of the story. So before Jekyll shuts himself away, he sent a letter asking Lanyon to force open his cabinet and take one of the drawers to him, which obviously is a strange request. And in the drawer there is blood red chemicals, which is part of Jekyll's experiment. Lanyon witnesses Jekyll then taking the potion. So when the messenger arrives, Lanyon doesn't realise that it's actually Hyde. We do, obviously. Hyde arrives at midnight, and which is important because Stevenson links Hyde with the nighttime, again to show secrecy and hidden desires and pleasure. Lanyon experiences the odd feeling that Enfield felt and Utterson felt when they saw Hyde, that he unsettles them. Lanyon's curiosity then leads him to discover the secret. So Hyde asks Lanyon if curiosity has got the better of him and if he wants to watch the transformation back into Jekyll as he drinks the potion. And we get a detailed description of the transformation, that Hyde's face was suddenly black. He put the glass to his lips, pale and shaken, etc. The mixture began to brighten like a man destroyed from... So we've got again, a huge description here. After seeing the transformation, Lanyon is shaken, isn't he? And he is ruined, I suppose, by what he's seen, because Jekyll has proven that the type of science Lanyon believes in can be disproved, and the type of science that Jekyll believes in can be real. So this chapter gives us information, a lot of information about science. It gives us the information of the transformation, the fact that Lanyon witnesses it. And the final chapter then is Henry Jekyll's story, and it's him discussing his discovery of the dual nature of mankind, and it goes back to when he was a young man. So we are told as a young man he was fond of respect and he grew up with wealth, but he was tempted by pleasure and he felt guilty about it, and he felt like he had to conceal these pleasures from this respectable reputation he had. So on the slide there you've got the duality of man, both sides of me. He needed separate identities. The fact that he believes man is not truly one but truly two. That he had to assume like a thick cloak that of Edward Hyde. So we already have this idea of distinguishing these two separate sides of man. The one that is respected and has a reputation within society, and the one that gives in to darker pleasures, the one that gives into sin. So Jekyll wants to enjoy the bad side of his life, but without feeling shame. So he dreams of separating the good and the bad sides of himself. So naturally he begins to use science to try and make this a possibility. So he's desperate to find the solution, isn't he? And obviously we know through the story that he does find this solution to separating these identities, as it says there. And the first time he does the experiment, it actually doesn't go to plan. Because actually what happens is he just becomes purely evil rather than a mixture of the two. Because remember, initially he just wants to indulge in the pleasures. But he then describes that Hyde becomes monstrous and actually can't control him. He, as Jekyll, becomes disgusted by the extent of Hyde's evil, i.e. trampling the girl and murdering Danvers Carew. But interestingly, when he describes taking the potion, the first thing he says is that he feels younger, lighter and happier. This idea that when you give in to sin or your pleasures, you actually enjoy it. As he starts to lose control as well, we get this idea that he's struggling with the two sides of himself, and we get this idea that he's pure evil, more wicked, tenfold more wicked. He's realising the evil side of his nature. You've got the one word quotation, disguise and pleasure, spirit of hell, the fact that he's lost in stature. Now, one morning he wakes up to find that he has turned into Hyde without taking the drugs. And Hyde now is growing a little bit taller as his personality becomes more powerful. So Jekyll decides to stop taking the potion. For 2 months he has a lovely life, a respectable life. However, he is desperate and tortured to become Hyde again. And he gives in to temptation and takes the potion. And that is the night that he murders Carew. And this is again showing us that he's lost control. But actually more disgusting, I suppose, is the fact that he enjoys the murder of Carew, doesn't he? He delights in it. So again, when he becomes Jekyll again, he's horrified and he doesn't want to be Hyde anymore. But, much like that night, he turns into Hyde while sitting in the park. Again, he hasn't taken the potion. And he believes this has happened because obviously the personality of Hyde is just too much. He says that he hates the brute that sleeps within. He can't accept that part of his personality, this character he's made, Hyde. And Jekyll realises that this experiment has destroyed his life, because as Jekyll gets weaker, Hyde gets stronger. Hyde then despises the way that Jekyll turns against him, and he begins to play ape-like tricks to punish Jekyll. So Jekyll's fate here is disturbing in the sense that Stevenson's showing us it's within human nature to want to act out pleasure, want to act out desire and sin. When Jekyll runs out of the potion and the vital ingredients for the potion, we have this sense of horror. So we know that Jekyll is going to be completely taken over by Hyde. And that is essentially where the book ends. This was just some quick revision on plot and key quotations, so please note down the key quotations as you go, because you're going to have to obviously remember them for your AQA exam.